Merkel Media.
I'm exhausted, looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow. I'm lost in this hole, but I don't wanna. I'm lost in this hole, 'cause I'm just trying to
What's good, everybody? This is Joel Thomas, and this is Free the Rabbits. And how are all the free-range rabbits doing out there today? First off, out the gate, I want to say thank you to everyone that's been giving a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, going to YouTube, leaving a nice comment, subscribing, hit the notifications, and sharing to everyone. It's been showing, and I really appreciate what everyone's been doing, and the people that have been going to Spotify and Apple and writing a nice review on top of it. It's helping the show get deeper into the algorithm and helping more people get access to the show that wouldn't normally get to the show. So for that, I want to thank you guys so much for doing that. And if you haven't done it, go do it right now before the show even gets started. Go give it a 5-star review, write a nice comment, and I promise at the end of the show every week, I read through as many of the comments as I possibly can. Also, for everyone that's been asking that doesn't know, the intro song, Free the Rabbits, is now out on all streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, and YouTube. Just type in Joel Thomas and Free the Rabbits, and you will see the song pop up wherever you listen to music. So if you're looking to add that to your playlist or find more of my music, just type in Joel Thomas on any music streaming platform, and that song plus all the other songs I have out will pop up. For now, let's get into the show. What's up, guys? I'm glad you're here, and we've got a very, very interesting topic today, but I do have a guest on, and he's a good friend of mine, and we've worked together on how much stuff over the past 2 years, a lot. And as a matter of fact, you were a part of the new film that we have coming out next year with yourself, Isaac Weishaupt, Tony Merkel, Ward Heine, Justin England from Crypts of the Corn, and countless others. And it's a phenomenal film. And actually, some of the topic that we'll talk about today will find its way here and there throughout the film too. But the film is called Crowley's Melonheads, Children of the Beast. And that's all I'm going to tell anybody right now. And if you want to dig around and see if you can figure out what that is, that's on you. But it's going to be a very interesting topic. It's going to be a mixture of boots on the ground, which we typically do, plus an inordinate amount of research by myself and several other researchers that will bring this entire film together. And I was glad to have you a part of it because you are the world-renowned homunculologist, and your forte is in homuncology and studying what the homunculus actually is. And it's so odd now, Juan, that you hear homunculus in the zeitgeist so much more now in the past couple of years. And I don't know if that's solely due to you, but I would say that the topic is broached a lot now, and I even see it in video games and in shows. And how, we could go to anime, and it's been around in anime for a long time, but a lot of esoteric and occult topics have been in anime since the late 80s, early 90s, if you really want to go all the way back to like Akira and all that stuff. But very interesting guy that you are, Juan. And this particular topic is something that can branch out into a lot of different ideas and different theories. It's not just a one shot thing, right? Because some topics will have just a one dimension to it, but this has a ton of different dimensions to it, almost like a tesseract. I would consider the homunculus a tesseract of knowledge. So before we get started about what we're going to talk about the homunculus today, let everybody know who you are, where to find you, and then we'll direct it back into the actual subject matter.
Dude, it's an honor to be here, and thank you for letting me be a part of that project. I'm very excited for when it comes out, and it's going to be great. It's going to be a huge success. And people can find me on my website is the easiest, tjojp.com. I'm obviously the host of the One-on-One podcast. Found on pretty much any podcast platform. I'm on YouTube. I'm pretty much everywhere and anywhere. We are shadow banned. So if you do search me up and you don't find it, then tjojp.com, the one-on-one podcast.com. And I've been on magazines. Here I am on the cover of the Paranormality magazine. It's inverted, but Florida's Homunculologist. And I also do self-publishing of some Occultist Monday. This is esoteric and occult literature. And my most recent one, and what I'm going to be reading from today a little bit, the Occultist Monday issue number 4, the Homunculus edition, which is 88 pages of homunculus goodness. It's going to have some of the stuff that we're talking about here today. I also have the Homunculus Owner's Manual. And you can also find me on twitch.tv/one-on-one podcast, streaming every Tuesday night, if that's the kind of thing you're into. Patreon.com/the one-on-one podcast and all that stuff, man. You know how it is out here doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, man. And you've been on a ton of massive conspiracy shows over the years. And I'm sure that if people haven't listened to you, they probably heard of you, at least in some of the occult spheres. And you definitely done some good work. And that was one of the reasons I wanted you as a part of that particular project, because there are some ideas that you've told me over the years, and you've also set me on my path to do my own research on, that tied in to help make that film what it is. And I think that without some of that info, it wouldn't have lined up the way that it did, and being able to figure out this overarching theory that not only attaches itself to occultists like Aleister Crowley, but other famous occultists as well. So I think it's going to be an interesting exercise in research and boots on the ground. And I told you before that we have something on camera that is mind-blowing. It's actually the most definitive thing we've had on camera since we started doing this stuff. So it's pretty wild, and I've kept it under wraps from everyone, so nobody's going to see it until the film drops. So I'm pretty excited for everyone to see that. So we've got a nice mix of this research and boots on the ground and going out and trying to find these cryptids. And I'm excited about it, and I know you are too. But we're going to get into this episode today. And before I pose this question, and I know I've got a lot of Christian listeners as well as non-Christians, but I know I encourage the Christians that listen to my show to have an open mind with things, because you and I both do a lot of research. And the research that we do is not always indicative of how we believe or how we think, right? We pose questions, we pose what other researchers or other ancient texts have said about things, and then we try to dissect it. And I'm going to pose the question, so I want people to not get too uptight early on, because the question is being posed because there are famous alchemists throughout history that have posed this question. There are some things in biblical texts that I'm going to present today that could support this idea to a point. I'm not saying the entire idea, because I don't adhere to this particular phrase holy, but I think if we look at the deeper layers of what it could mean, at least from a supernatural sense, that it is possible in a format that makes sense to even a believer. But everybody relax. Let me pose the question and then let us present the research and then actually what we actually think about it. And then you can walk away from it and then say if you like it or not, or if you like some of it, or if you don't like any of it at all. The question is, was Jesus a homunculus? And that is a topic that I've seen you do before, and it's gotten people to go 0 to 60 in less than 0.0033 seconds. So quick, to the point that they don't actually listen to the research that you've done on the topic to then understand that you're researching what these alchemists have talked about and their process of alchemy and how they understand things about the world. It doesn't necessarily mean what you personally think or what I personally think. However, I think there's always truths within any type of research that we do. So I want people to really listen to this particular podcast, listen to the research you've done. I've got some questions I'm going to ask you and some research I've done myself just to add a few layers to what you're already going to bring. But I think it's an important topic in the sense of understanding the supernatural, because I think sometimes these alchemists try to find a way to understand the supernatural, and just like any man on this earth, none of us actually understand it. And even those great alchemists didn't actually understand it, not even close. And as close as they may have thought they gotten to it, and maybe closer than other people, they still didn't understand it. But I'm going to pass the baton to you now, Juan, in this very controversial topic of, was Jesus a homunculus?
Yikes. Yeah, before you even got done asking that question, by the time people clicked on this video, they were already typing the comments out, dude. So, they're in the comments already. They're neck deep in the sauce. And to preface again how you said, this is not my personal belief. We're simply looking at this from a research perspective, and it is a concept that has been around for thousands of years, hundreds of years. In particular, the way that I came across it was from the 16th or 15th century text of Alonzo Tostado and Arnaldo's Villanova as well. He talked about it. There's various alchemists who interpreted the birth of Jesus as homunculological in nature, I guess you could say it. And so, yeah, this is not like, before the people come, oh, it's L for believing that Jesus is like, bro, it's not even, it's in the history books. Like, if you just read about it, it's there. I want to introduce what a homunculus is for those that don't know what a homunculus is. And the homunculus is a concept that came into existence in the 16th century by what some people call pseudo-Paracelsus. Some people say that it wasn't Paracelsus that actually wrote about this. But in the Natura Rerum, he wrote about this he had this weird passage. And the passage was pretty much on how to create this little artificial humanoid being. Now, you can call it an alchemical chia pet of sorts, right? Chia or something, something like that. The first one. And Paracelsus actually came up and he homunculus means little man or miniature man. Now, it's funny because I'm saying, was Jesus a homunculus? In part, yes. And the yes part is, in early art, Jack, pull up the picture, right? They were painting Jesus, right? The baby and Madonna picture, and Jesus in a lot of these pictures, sometimes he looks like a little miniature Joe Rogan. He is actually a miniature man with a six-pack and a little staff and a full set of hair. And the reason for this was because they believed, like, hey, if this is the Messiah, if this is the savior of humanity, let's give him some respect. Let's draw him with a little bit of wisdom. So they literally drew Jesus, they painted Jesus as a little homunculus. So he was a miniature man. Now, The alchemical homunculus, right? We have a few definitions here. A homunculus is an artificial human created by magic. A homunculus does the bidding of its creator. According to Paracelsus, the homunculus is, quote, the image or figure of a, quote, small man with every limb and shape like a man. It is based on the idea that the external shape and form of an object reveals its internal properties and powers. Thus, the homunculus, and I'm reading from the Occultus Mundi, thus the homunculus as an image of man possesses all abilities and powers of man, for a hidden human nature is concealed in it in a spiritual way. It is thus possible for this image to perform all operations of man completely. Now, this is very Gnostic in nature. They believed in, right, the as above, so below, the microcosm, macrocosm, and these guys believe that we all, very Gnostic, that we all had this hidden spark within us. And that the homunculus, since it was made in the image of God, had this ability. But the homunculus was, right, this artificially created entity. And since it was made through the art, it was almost like a demigod, right? Like a miniaturized god. And a homunculus can be considered the ultimate simulacrum of man or a person. The one that we all know, right, is made of earth, wax, or metal. Sometimes it's a doll or effigy. Does that sound familiar at the Bohemian Grove when they burn the effigy? A good example that the general population has been exposed to at some point in time is the voodoo doll. So if we go back to this concept of the homunculus as a talisman of sorts, right? So it looks like a man, and in a sympathetic magical way, which Paracelsus was very fond of sympathetic magic, it contains powers that are innate in us, right? We're talking about the paranormal. Some people can see the future. Some people can prophesy. Some people can divinate. Therefore, this thing that's created through the art, the royal art, is magical in nature because it came from magic. So therefore, this little homunculus, it was believed that by Paracelsus that it could prophesize to you. It could move the moon. You could grow it into old age. And according to him, if you grew it into old age, it could become a mythological creature, a giant dwarf, things of that nature. This is, again, according to the I don't want to say the scripture, according to the literature, this is all the things that a homunculus could do. And so if it's a talisman, mind you, this is 16th century that we're talking about right now, but if we go into pre-16th century, usually, I refer to these as proto-homunculus because the word didn't exist. And they were usually depicted as, I've seen it called the boy, the substance, a humanoid, different words. And these guys were already experimenting with this thing that would later become alchemy, late in the 16th century. And we're talking about these, Jabir bin Hayyan guys, 9th, 10th century. And in these scriptures, these grimoires, they had already stepped it. They scaled it, everything. They really took it to 100%. And what they were doing is, mind you, keeping all of the philosophies of Paracelsus that this is a magical entity, this is a magical being, this is a talisman. I call it a blood and bone talisman. And I've referred to the homunculus as the utility knife of the occult. And these guys in the 9th and 10th century, they were writing recipes on how to utilize the homunculus in various ways. Now, some of those ways was how you could take various parts of the homunculus and essentially vivisect it or dissect it and use its various parts for magical rituals to obtain magical powers, to obtain a level of godhood. Now, it's interesting because a lot of these things that they were able to do with these homunculi resembled the miracles that Jesus was doing, such as walking on water, seeing spirits, becoming impervious to pain, things of this nature. Now, the reason for that was later speculated because Jesus, to step it into an alchemical sense, is seen as a mercurial figure. Now, I'm speaking in alchemical terms. Mercury sometimes is subjected to torture or ill treatment of sorts. And we know that Jesus was what? Crucified. He was treated illy. He was, mistreated before he was crucified. And usually Mercury, when you look at all these alchemical paintings and these alchemical emblems, right, they're all processes. And usually it's very dark. Usually it's about chopping up various substances. Some people interpret it as the destruction of worlds to birth a new one. And you see this when they bring down Saturn or Mercury or Venus or the moon or the sun and stuffing it into an alchemical vessel and destroying it to bring forth this new reality, essentially. So again, you can get lost in the sauce with alchemy because it is, how you're saying, this tesseract of going within and within and within, and it's never ending, right? So we have this concept of these guys wanted to break down the miracles of Jesus, and it was like, oh, it was black magic, or it was white magic, or he was this, he was that. And it's all at the core really much of any story of creation. Really, man is created from what? From dirt, from clay, whatever. The first Adam in the Talmud was a golem, which is another form of homunculus technology, in my opinion. A golem is an artificially created entity through the use of word magic. And in any story of creation, Babylonian, Mesopotamian, Greek, a lot of these stories of creation, man is created from inanimate matter and animated. You have the story of Prometheus. And alchemy, one of the definitions of alchemy is taking inanimate matter and animating it. Okay? And so this leads us to, okay, well, why did they believe that Jesus was a homunculus? Well, the one key concept, let me switch to the chapter here. The one main thing was, and I call it artificial messiahs, because I believe that this is a form of technology that will be revealed in the new documentary, was something that people were believing at pretty recently. Up until the 1900s. And I believe, dude, because we talk about, I know people who will blame the Illuminati for their bad choices. And, we talk about the reptilian elites and these royal bloodlines. And in my opinion, Joel, if they're not lizard people, then they're homunculi or a form thereof. Okay. And the reason I say that is because this technology has evolved, right? With the introduction of chaos magic, which is a very powerful form of magic, it throws out the ceremonial stuff. It throws out all the mumbo jumbo of dressing up in a robe and doing all this stuff. And all you need is belief, intention, and will. And as long as you have those, anything is possible. Now, for those who are quick to discredit and to throwing away the homunculus with the bathwater, if you will, if they're quick to throw away and disregard the occult, well, really quickly, take out a dollar bill. What are all these symbols doing on your dollar bill? What were all the founding fathers a part of? Well, secret societies, a lot of them. And a lot of them can be traced back to alchemy. Freemasonry is linked to Solomon. Solomon was what? Probably one of the greatest alchemists in the history of all time. Right? So for those like, oh, this is mumbo jumbo. No, it's fine, because the founding fathers of this kind, look at Assassin's Creed, bro. So, speaking of video games, I just recently finished playing Warhammer 40K. They have a form of, they call it a Homunculi in the 40K universe, whereas these distorted alchemical creations. And so, again, this belief has been around for a while, and I think it's still going on, a form of it. And so, when it was introduced to me, this idea of this artificial Messiah, and we know that throughout, and I'm going to be coming up with, I have a slideshow with examples of all these messiahs or these deity figures that were born from a miraculous conception. Now, I'm not saying that just because they're born miraculously that they equal homunculus. No, but we're going to get there because we know that this is Nephilim technology.
I got a couple things.
Yeah,
before you jump in on some of the stuff you already said. And oddly enough, I was already down some of the rabbit holes of specifically the Golem. And you were talking about Adam. And especially when you're looking at some of the Kabbalah and what they considered Adam to be. And I know Christians will literally throw the Kabbalah completely out. And I get why. And I'm not saying that it's a great thing as a whole, but I, like you, like to study everything. And I like to understand exactly what's going on. And to do that, you have to look at several different points of view. And crazy enough, this idea of the Golem is biblical. And this is in Psalm 139:16. Now, the verse is, "Your eyes saw my unformed body. All my days are written in your book and ordained for me before one of them came to be." Now, this is specifically talking about the creation of Adam. The unformed body in the Hebrew is galimi or galmi, which means golem. So in the Bible, the word golem is used one time in this particular verse in Psalm, and it's specifically talking about Adam. So the concept of the golem is not something that's not biblical. It literally is in the Bible that to Christians like myself would consider the inherent word of God. So if God himself is saying that Adam was a golem, then the word golem should be something that we consider when it's talking about creation. I think when people hear certain words that they automatically attach to the esoteric world or occult, then they get really uptight and they want to throw it out without understanding the actual context of what that means. Do I think that these alchemists creating these golem were doing the right thing? Probably not. Like, they were, in my opinion, trying to recreate what the Father already created with Adam. And I think we're going to find this with this homunculus idea as well, without getting all the way to the end, that Yeshua was like the ultimate version of that process. That these homunculus that were created after that, when they started using the term homunculus, was just an inversion of what the original concept was. And I think that's where we can put the parallels down. But yeah, Adam was a golem, according to scripture, because he was clay that was breathed life into.
He was the red man, yeah.
Exactly. So when you look at it from that aspect, you have to look at what these alchemists are saying. Also, for people that don't know, guys like Paracelsus and all the way down were deep researchers of the Bible and scripture. They weren't trying to do a bunch of stuff outside of it. As a matter of fact, John Dee was deep into the church. He thought what he was doing
was
scriptural. Which also lends to the idea that people can be deceived as well. And I think a lot of that had to do with his good old buddy who was scrying for him, right? So that's a whole other topic. But these guys were studying scripture. And for them to see something like this going into the Hebrew and say, what's this word? Golem? And it's only used one time in Psalm, and that's it. That's the only time it's used in the Hebrew, but it's specifically talking about the creation of Adam. And they're going to look into that. And then they're going to, as alchemists, and especially if, which I think most alchemists did, even before the term was used, adhered to some sort of Gnostic ideology. Their idea was that they could become God by tapping into the divine spark, the Azoth, all of these things, the prima materia that they would draw from to then elevate themselves into this sphere of the archons and all of these other deities, right? Because they believed in the pantheon of gods. They believed there was one creator, and then there was a pantheon of gods underneath it. I don't disavow that idea at all. I actually adhere to that part because that's actually in scripture. So the idea of the Elohim or these other gods or this divine council is in scripture. So I do think there is some sort of pantheon of gods that are underneath Yahweh or the creator. And I think that they have jobs. And as a matter of fact, in Psalm, it talks about they weren't doing their jobs, so they were judged. So we have to understand with our feeble minds that the supernatural world is something that is far beyond our comprehension. These alchemists are trying to understand it. Now, I do think that they were deceived in a lot of ways, and I'm not an adherent to Gnosticism myself. I study it. There aren't things, put it this way, there are some things that I do like, but I don't like the idea of us living in a matrix or a simulation that we are basically out of control at that point. And that the creator is not someone that we can personally connect to, but we have to become some god to even get close. I don't believe that at all. I do think that the mainstream church had that part right. I do think that we have access to God. However, we can argue that there were people within the early Roman Catholic Church that wanted to divide us away from our connection, personal connection with God. And I know you and I have similar thoughts on Gnosticism. However, I don't throw it all out. And I'm saying that some of those guys were trying to find the truth, and some of them were disillusioned by what the church was doing at the time. At least some parts of it. I don't think all of the church was bad. I do think that there were some parts that were really trying to help people. And part of the reason why you had to have priests or preachers preaching the gospel to people is because they couldn't read. Like, they couldn't. And it's not to say that all of them were stopping them from being able to read. It was just the product of the times. And it's easy for us in our modern minds to take a modern ideology and try to implement it in the past and say that, well, this is what it should be like. Well, yeah, to our modern minds, but to a past sect of people that couldn't read, and maybe some of them didn't even want to read, a lot of them, and wanted to go to the church. I believe that there were good people within the church. I don't think it was all evil, and that's all I'm saying. I think that there's a combination of both. And I do think the same thing with Gnostics. I think there were guys who were trying to do the right thing as well. So that's just a side note on what I think about the Gnostic ideology. But back to the Golem, I don't think it's a Gnostic ideology. I think the idea of the Golem is literally biblical. And Adam was, for all intents and purposes, a golem that was breathed life into a ball of clay.
I have a massive presentation that I've been putting together for, I think, over a year now, a year and a half. And it's got to do with what I believe to be a super esoteric cosmic war, and one of the lesser known occult symbols, which is the palm tree. And in one of the stories of creation, I forget which one, the leftover clay from which Adam is created God or the deity molds his aunt, the palm tree. And I think 175 slides deep on the occult significance of the palm tree. And when you start to peel it apart, it's wild, bro. So I'll eventually do that. But you just reminded me, the red man, and then from the leftover clay, this essentially other bloodline was created, in my opinion. And it goes all over the place. You have the palm and shell Freemasonry sect and all this other stuff. So I'll eventually do that, but absolutely, I love that concept, right? That there is this pantheon. I mean, the Book of Enoch talks about this. Genesis 3:22, they have become like one of us, right? 3:22, skull and bones. Who's us? What are you talking about? And I think that right at the end of Enoch 3, which is right, you have 1 Enoch, 2 Enoch, 3 Enoch, and you even have a 4 Enoch, I believe. There's an extra run after that. Now, these are talked about that maybe they weren't part of the same author. It might be fan fiction. But one of the things that interests me about the Book of Enoch and what I believe, and the reason I believe it was left out of the canon, was because it reveals, where we're talking about this Gnostic cosmology of becoming a god, these guys using, and absolutely you're correct, I think that it was about, in some researchers' perspective, such as David Pingree, who was translating some of these homunculus texts and all these things. Unfortunately, he's passed now, but these guys talked about how the creation of a homunculus was to acquire godlike powers for some people. For some other people, it was to become a god. And he even speculated that people would become possessed when they were creating these things. Now, that steps into a whole nother can of worms, which I want to get into here after I read I had a friend of mine, shout out to homie Romy. When I first started and I embarked in this whole journey of the homunculus, he's like, dude, Jesus was a homunculus. And I was like, dude, shut up, bro. So heretical, man. Just be quiet, right? It's blasphemous. Don't you dare say that again. And then like a year later, I'm doing research and I'm like, what is this? So the idea for me was presented through the writings of the 15th century Spanish theologian Alonzo Tostado and Thomas Aquinas, a theologian and a doctor of the church at the time. Okay. Now, these guys were going back and forth at it. Tostado and Aquinas, and they were going, back then the Twitter wars were tomes, bro. Just like, boom. It's like, what? You got what to say? And they took out their little quill or whatever it was. They dipped it into the ink. They were like, just writing. And you can find these writings online. Tostado proposed that Mary was a quote-unquote sealed vessel. Again, this is a variation from our traditional homunculus. There was no semen present, but Mary did have menstrual blood and a womb. Although Tostado argued that Mary would not have had enough blood for a full development of Jesus in the womb, therefore, he would have been condensed in a miniature version of a baby. So according to Aristotelian biology and the alchemical process, Jesus was conceived as a homunculus, a miniature human kept in a sealed vessel from the first instant of creation. Now, Tostado was a guy who studied paradoxes in the Bible. Mind you, he was a theologian. He was heavily into the religion and heavily into the Bible, but he was studying the paradoxes of, hey, if it says this in here, why does it say that over there? Now, we know that sometimes things can contradict themselves. I mean, that's just part of it. So Aquinas argued that there was no need for sperm because the Holy Spirit was infinitely powerful and could fashion matter into any form instantly. So that was his rebuttal for that. Like, no. Is this perhaps why they, and then I speculated some other stuff. Tostado would go on to present the repercussions of creating homunculi. He stated that the threat of tempting God by allowing the homunculus to grow into a fully developed human would demote the term mother to the status of a flask. It would also go against the views of the church, the concept of salvation where Jesus died for everyone's sins and excluding the spontaneously created forms of life, which resulted from experiments like this. Then I talk about the Arnaldian homunculus, where Arnold of Villanova, we get into the ethics of the homunculus, where it's like, well, some researchers have speculated that these homunculus were vessels for demonic entities. Some other ones called homunculus artificial demons. Now, this is where we get into your ballpark, or right, your neck of the woods, where the melonheads reside, because we know, you talked about the Gnostics in alchemy. Well, I would call alchemy Gnostic because Hermes Trismegistus was one of the patron saints of the Gnostics. And we know he was at the forefront of the alchemical movement pretty much. And so if we trace back the origins of alchemy, and you and I have talked about this before, it's traced directly back to the Nephilim. Now, Hermes Trismegistus, according to some, was in the bloodline of Moses. Alchemists regarded the Book of Genesis as the most alchemical text that there ever was, because it reveals the secrets of how to create an unus mundus, or the philosopher's stone, or another reality. And so, what are the spirits, or who are the spirits that are inhabiting these homunculus? Now, in my opinion, if these Nephilim, right, because the origins of alchemy are Nephilimic, I'm sure that's not a word, but Nephilim in nature, because this was the knowledge that they passed down directly to the daughters of men in exchange for arousal, you know what I'm saying? And the offspring of the fallen ones with the daughters of men, right? Those were the Nephilim, right? They were the half hybrid kind of, sort of. That kind of falls in line with homunculus, right? Because we have this part divinity, part human, demigod, essentially. And then they're teaching the secrets. If the Nephilim were these interdimensional beings, and I want to get your opinion on this, in my opinion, they saw their downfall. Because they're in touch with God. I mean, we have the story of the Watchers in Enoch, and I believe that what I was going to say earlier, I believe that the Book of Enoch, at the very end of it, once Enoch is done interacting with these Watchers and learning the secrets, right? Because the Watchers are watching the divine alchemist at work. They're watching the divine alchemist create and uncreate reality. And once Enoch learned all the secrets, once he learned everything, he became Metatron. He became the lesser Yahweh. And he sat next to him and a throne next to him. And I interpret that as, once you learn all the secrets, you dissolve out of reality and you become this overseer of reality, right? Almost like what the Gnostics believed, that once you achieved your gnosis, you can transcend. And similar to alchemy, that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to, the great work, the magnum opus, to what? To step outside of reality. Right? So they were trying to find a way to achieve that Godhead status through the knowledge that the Nephilim presented to them, which is alchemy. Now, if these Watchers, these fallen ones, these Nephilim, whatever, if they saw their downfall, what a better way than to have a dead man switch, for lack of a better term, than to be like, hey, I'm going to pass down this knowledge of alchemy that is knowledge directly from us, this supernatural, interdimensional thing. And within that knowledge, you can just so happen to create vessels for us to later come down and re-inhabit this dimension, bro. Because I don't know if you've ever heard of Joseph Lumpkin's work, But Joseph, he's done various translations. He's a good friend of mine of the books of Enoch and different apocryphal texts. And he has this book called The Origins of Evil. And within it, he speculates that once, the deluge came and destroyed all the Nephilim, we know that one of the laws of thermodynamics is energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed. Therefore, the spirits of those Nephilim are still here. And those are the ones that demonically possess people. Those are the ones that are constantly at work, right? The archons, whatever you want to call them, that are constantly at work to try and bring down humanity or elevate it to a status that it was when the deluge came, because God was like, hey, I'm tired of all this chaos happening right now. You guys are running amok, so I have to destroy you. And I think that that's where we get into the concept of the homunculus becoming, where I believe that they're building all these new towers of Babel with CERN and all these different things. And I do believe that technology is another form of homunculus, dude, because what happens? And this is in Resident Evil, I believe. When an entity is able to inhabit, what happens, Joel, if we are the perfect creation, right? And we know that the Nephilim or these entities can inhabit our bodies because maybe we are perfect enough, right? And I agree with you with the whole homunculus being an inversion or the attempt at these alchemists trying to emulate the creation of life of God, because God did it first and he did it the best because he's God. And in my opinion, what happens when we get to the point where technology is close to perfection to where an entity is able to inhabit that? What happens then? If an entity can inhabit a talisman or an amulet, wouldn't it be able to take over a robot or something? Right? Demonically possess a robot to start doing stuff? I mean, that's very much a possibility in my opinion. Robots are made of crystals and metals and things of that nature. And we've covered the occult origins of technology and how these boards look like what John Dee was using for the communication of angels. Spoiler alert, they weren't angels.
Yeah. And you just said a lot right there. And I'm going to touch on some of it because you were asking about what I thought. I think the initial question was about Enoch and this ascension piece. So when it comes to the books of Enoch, I adhere more to the first book. And I'll say that in my research, the first book is what a lot of people think should be in the canonical Bible. I am not in that camp, but I'm not saying that it doesn't have a ton of weight to it. There are just some disparities in that book that don't line up with certain things biblically to me. I'm not going to argue with people, though, over if they think it should be in there or not, because the stuff that they like out of it, I like too. So what you're talking...
It's a wild book, bro.
It's a wild book. Now, when you get to like Enoch 2, Enoch 3, and Enoch 2 is the one where Enoch transcends to Metatron, these are considered to be, even mainstream researchers, to be Gnostic texts. As a matter of fact, the second book of Enoch is attributed to an unidentified Jewish sect. So they don't even know who exactly wrote it, but it came out long after the first book was supposedly written. And no one that I know who does any research, even if they want to dispel the Bible, adheres to that book being written by the original Enoch. And I have questions about the original Enoch writing the first book wholly. I think some of it, I used to say no, none of it, but I think there are portions of it I think were, just in my opinion, and I think there are other portions that I like to attribute to what I call the evil Enoch, which was the first Enoch, which was the son of Cain. And we can tie that back into Thoth, and that's a whole nother episode. And as a matter of fact, I just did an episode called Old Earth, the Kings List, where I broke down the original kings before the deluge and how that deluge is not the same deluge as in the Bible. It was a deluge before that. And it's a very interesting concept. But as far as Enoch goes, I like a lot of it. And I just wanted to preface that and what I think. Now, what you're specifically talking about is in Enoch 16. And there are 5 verses. And this is where people get the idea of these Nephilim entities needing host bodies. Because there are some verses in the Bible, and I've spoken about them before on here, and really to understand how that works is to really break down the Hebrew. But the first book of Enoch breaks it down to, even in the English translation, is pretty evident what it means. And I'll read those 5 verses now, just so people have an idea of what that means. But 16:1, and as to the death of the giants, whosoever their spirits depart from their bodies, let their flesh, that which is perishable, be without judgment. Thus shall they perish until the day of the great consummation of the great world. A destruction shall take place of the watchers and the impious. And now to the watchers who have sent you to pray for them, who in the beginning were in heaven. In heaven have you been. Secret things, however, have not been manifested to you, yet have you known a reprobated mystery. Reprobated mystery. So what kind of mysteries are these angelic beings giving to man? This goes into the creation of the homunculus, into the creation of the golem, vast amounts of technology that we don't understand now, how these megaliths and the Great Pyramid was built, and all of these things that we are trying to wrap our minds around. This is these reprobated mysteries. 16:4, and this you have related to women in the hardness of your heart, and by that mystery have women and mankind multiplied evils upon the earth. Say to them, never therefore shall you obtain peace. So that last 16:5 says, say to them, that's speaking to the Nephilim, never therefore shall you obtain peace. So their spirits do not have peace, and they need a host body or some sort of host something. You were talking about actual technology that we would understand as technology as far as AI, robotics, and the like. I think that these spirits, who are the dead Nephilim spirits of this evil portion of Nephilim, and people know how I feel about Nephilim as a whole. I don't think they were all bad. I think some of them were redeemed. But the ones that decided to continue to follow what their fathers wanted them to follow, that their spirits are looking for host bodies. They still adhere to these fallen entities as their fathers, even in the spirit form, but they need something to be able to manifest physically here. And I think that's where these homunculus come into play. Now, I want to preface that with, I do not think that Jesus Christ, Yeshua, was a homunculus that a Nephilim was trying to come inside.
What a wild thing, yeah.
And I just know I have to say that because there are people that will think that because when we say or ask the question that these alchemists asked, was Jesus a homunculus? We're not suggesting that. What we are saying is the process of what these alchemists are trying to do with the homunculus later, that this process, the divine process of Yahweh, when he, like you said, the Holy Spirit created Yeshua inside of Mary, this virgin birth, that when that happened, that process would be considered to the alchemist an homunculus process. They were trying to mimic it by creating these homunculus. They never could get it quite right. And obviously, they're just creating host bodies, in my opinion, for some of these entities to enter. So,
because remember, Joel, sorry to cut you off. What I mentioned earlier, some researchers have speculated that, right, we have the archetype of the mad scientist. What drives a mad scientist? Have you ever thought to think maybe the mad scientist was possessed? And so when he's possessed, which I think that a lot of people who are at the forefront of a lot of these things that right, you have in Israel, they found a workaround the laws of having a embryo grown in a lab. So according to the laws, you have to unalive an embryo after 14 days. Well, what if it's a copy of what if it's an artificial embryo? Well, there's no laws for that.
Hey, and to piggyback a little bit on what you just said, the 14-day process of having to unalive that embryo, well, I'll tell you a man who had a process for that. Aleister Crowley had a legitimate process on how to create a homunculus. Liber 167, De Homunculo Espitola is the name of the Liber, where he told people how to create an actual homunculus. And he talks about that it has to hit 4.5 months of gestation before, in conjunction, Juan, with angelic beings who he names, who these angelic beings are. Nakael, Raphael, Haniel, Aniel, who are there with him to help him implement this spirit. Never specifies what the spirit is. We can infer from that by what we've just spoken about these spirits that are roaming the earth, these Nephilim spirits. He's imbuing this homunculus at 4.5 months of gestation with this spirit in conjunction with angelic beings. I think as a total, he names off 6 or 7 angelic beings that are with him.
Why do you think that is, Joel? Why do you, because, right, angels are supposed to serve God, but then we have these occultists, and not just Crowley. I mean, pretty much all John D talked about Gabriel, all he was talking to them essentially. Why do you think that is, that they invoke the angelic entities, but for evils, but then the angelic entities are supposed to be good? No?
I think that's where the deception piece comes in. And I think it goes back to even talking about Hillel, who some people will see the translation into Lucifer, but Hillel is actually the Hebrew name for the light bearer. He presents himself as an angel of light. It's not like they look like they're evil. They can present a certain form. And we may see certain names in the biblical text like Gabriel, and then see some of these occultists speaking to an angelic being called Gabriel. I'll be honest with you, it doesn't mean they're talking to the Gabriel. It just could be one of them that is masquerading because these occultists know that name from a biblical sense. So if I masquerade myself as this said angel that you know the name of, you're going to be more likely to believe whatever I tell you. And I think that, and I won't go on a whole tirade about Crowley here because I've done months and months and months of research, and I'm still doing research on Crowley. It's just such a vast topic of his life. But one of the things about Crowley was he thought he was doing the right thing. And he thought that Christianity was of the devil, basically, because of what the Puritans did to his father and how that his father died. And he was very close to his father as a child. And by his father dying by the hands of the Puritans, accidentally, they just thought they were doing God's will by not taking him to an actual physician. And they were going to use some experimental methods to help him and end up killing him. So he kind of drew his parallel to Horus and used this parallel of him being Horus and being created from the death of his father to then go after his brother, which he considered his brother Christianity. So that was Crowley's point of his whole life, was to extinguish Christianity because he thought it was evil. And in doing that, he contacted all these angelic beings because he didn't think that the angelic beings were evil. He just thought that there was a twisted sense of duality going on, the cosmic battle of good and evil behind the scenes. And he thought that what was evil was actually good. The whole inversion thing, the idea of Baphomet, which he actually called
redemption
himself.
through sin. Yeah.
Correct. So I think that a lot of these occultists adhered to those rules I actually don't think John Dee was one of those guys. I just think he was wholly deceived because, one, he wasn't a scryer, so he just believed whatever any scryer told him. And if you look at his life, he was a very smart guy, but he was easily deceived by the guys around him that told him what these angelic beings were telling him to do.
Some people think it was the other way around, bro.
Really?
Some people think that D was the mastermind. He was actually the one pushing Kelly to continue when Kelly didn't want to, and Kelly continued because he had to help his family out with the money and all this other stuff. And some people speculate that D was actually the bad one, mistreating and abusing of Kelly by making them scry for 12 hours straight a day and pray. So
that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. And it's funny, maybe that was the...
Because he comes off as this, oh, poor John Dee. They made him do all these things. But what if he was possessed, bro? Back again to this concept of like that unquenchable thirst for that Faustian complex that we all have. I mean, that we all want to know where the world came from. We all want to know how the universe was created. We all want to know about the Nephilim. What was it? What was it? And this dude was going to any length possible because the angels kept saying like, hey, if you do this one more thing, he was playing a real life MMORPG, bro, because at one point the angels were like, get us dirt from these 10 different areas and bring it to us. And I promise you, once you bring that, we're going to reveal the secrets of reality. And D was like, go get this, get that. And it just kept going and going and going and going. And we know how it ended.
What about this idea? What about this idea about D? And it just struck me. What if it is what you say and it's what I say at the same time? We talk about MK Ultra and split personalities and possession. What if he believed himself to be doing right, and maybe he was in some context, but in the possession piece of it, he became this evil mastermind. And because of this split personality, he never knew what the other personality was actually doing. It's a thought.
Bro, he might have been possessed. I mean, we know that there is the evidence that D had some of the famous grimoires on how to create homunculus. He had 2 copies of the Liber Vitae, which is an extensive grimoire on how to use these homunculus for power. He had the largest library of Europe at the time. What if, dude, I'll put this out there, because one of the books that he asked, I forgot which angel he asked, it doesn't matter. He asked one of the angels, he had this book, the Book of Enoch. And he had this book and he didn't know if it was real or not. And it's a book of like full of tables and stuff like that. And allegedly the angel told him, the copy you have is authentic. And this is why I think that books are a portal to other dimensions and a way to also get infected by these informational entities. And I think that's why the Gnostics were taken out, because they had come into contact with this informational entity, this informational parasite, and they were doomed, right? Because that set them on this quest that you're never able to find the end of. Because at the end of the tunnel, it's God. That's what a lot of conspiracy theorists don't want to admit. Like, at the end of all the conspiracies, bro, at the end of all the rabbit holes, it leads you back to one place: God. But hey, God, Jesus isn't cool, right? So people don't want to talk about that. It's not cool enough. But I believe that, right, he had the largest library of all time, and he maybe came into contact with some information. But this Book of Enoch, allegedly, the angel told him that that there was only one other angel that could read it. Again, I could be getting this mixed up because it's a bunch of information, but essentially, if you were to speak the words within those books, it would bring forth the apocalypse. And according to this angel, John Dee had an authentic copy of it. I believe it was written by Adam or Enoch, one of these biblical patriarchs, some far down the road or down the line, the lineage. And if you could utter the words and decipher this text, you would bring forth Ragnarok or the apocalypse or the end of the world as we knew it, So I think books, bro. I think it's all at the books. It's all in the books.
And I think that that's always been my biggest pushback on people who believe wholly everything that comes out of the Sumerian text, the Ugarit, as being the oldest known text. And I always push back and say known, because I believe there are a lot of texts that are much older that we do not know about, that are hidden away in places like the Vatican or with certain elite families. And possibly, and I want to throw this out there too, because I'm not a doom and gloomer on this show, I believe that there are Christians who are preserving certain texts too behind the scenes. And I would say that there would be, in my opinion, considered double agents on the side of Christianity who is also fighting back against this idea of globalism and these elite families. I don't think that we have to be so doomer mentality if we are Christians or if we have a belief in God, because that should override all of it. So if he's in control, why wouldn't he also have people who work for him who are just as smart and who are there to preserve things as well? And I think there could be text out there that would prove certain things that you and I talk about all the time, for sure. But we don't have those. And I think it's tough to say where they're at, but I don't want to just throw it all in a lump and say it's just all these evil guys trying to hide it either. So it just becomes so exhausting when we think that everything's evil and everything is being manipulated just by evil. Well, where's good at that point? Where is it? I'm open to the idea of the apocalypse and when that's actually going to happen and all these things, but it doesn't mean it's happening tomorrow. And if it is, I think that we just need to live our lives fully. But in thinking back to ancient text, you were talking about, I was talking about evil Enoch, and I've done some research as of recent about the Emerald Tablets and how they were passed to the evil Enoch and how Enoch hid them away. And that's how Hermes Trismegistus found them later in the pyramid. And when Egyptian culture rose to the heights that it was at and even spread into the Americas. And I just did an episode on that too. So that's very interesting stuff. But back to this homunculus, I want to jump now on.
Let me add something really quick.
Yeah.
Joel, before you move on Crowley, I think it's an interesting connection and I think it's valid in kind of confirming, right? So we knew that you brought up Liber 167 and 168, the Homunculus, you know which one.
Mm-hmm.
And
167.
Yeah, 167. It's interesting because we know Crowley was the heir to a business. And it was his father's brewing company. And what's interesting about the brewing process and the creation of wine and spirits and all these other things is that it's very alchemical in nature. And I've been meaning to try this. I haven't tried it because I think it's going to be a lot of work, but I've been wanting to start a sourdough. And I don't know if you've seen the sourdoughs, but I've compared the creation of sourdough because again, it's about the fermentation process, similar to the yeast and the beer and all that stuff. And sourdough, dude, you need to feed it and it moves. It's alive in this container. And if you look at it, it's like if you don't feed it, it dies and all this stuff. And it's very similar to a lot of these texts of feeding your homunculus milk at night or feeding your homunculus blood from its mother, right? Blood from the calf. Yeah.
And real quick before we move on, it's Liber 367, not 167. So if anybody's looking it up, they'll actually know the number. It's 367. So it was a lot further down the Libers that Crowley wrote. But yes, I agree with you. And it plays into the idea of spirits, right? The idea of you drinking an entity and inhabiting you and it changing your personality. And I will say this, when you look at people who use drugs or overindulge with drinking or go on trips, quote unquote, mushroom trips or ayahuasca, any of that kind of stuff, you have now opened yourself up to these spirits, these entities, and you are essentially becoming a vessel for these spirits or entities to inhabit. And you'll hear a lot of stories about people who do things that they do not remember doing when they're, on too much alcohol or any kind of drug for that matter. And they'll wake up and, something bad happened and they don't remember it. And I'm not saying that people can't get inebriated to the point that they don't know what's going on around them, but I believe if we play into the idea of the spirits and why it's called that through the etymology, that it does play into that idea that you are opening yourself up for entities to inhabit or at least manipulate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just found it interesting that was that connection there with the little so all those people right now who have that sourdough in their kitchen, you're creating a homunculus, all right? So just be careful, and if you want to tame it, make sure to check out the Homunculus Owner's Manual at TJOJP.com.
Creating a golem in your kitchen. And by definition, that's exactly what you're doing. So I want to switch gears and move into this divine homunculus idea, because this is to rein it back into this why that these alchemists thought that Yeshua was a homunculus. And there are many stories throughout history of either virgin births or gods creating gods, or even men being created that weren't demigods or the like, but were created by a divine process. And I want you to speak on some of that right now, because I think that's very interesting to put these parallels to, was this a process that was just mythology in these stories, or did these things actually happen and they were trying to recreate the process of Yeshua either before or after him? But here's the thing. Just because it happened before he got here doesn't mean that these angelic beings didn't understand there was a blueprint on the way. And I've done a lot of research on the fact that they knew what was coming. So why wouldn't they be trying to not only stop it, but implement a process very similar to it? I'm a big adherent on some of these gods and goddesses throughout history actually existed, either in the form of some sort of fallen entity or Elohim or a demigod. So I think that these things very possibly could have existed and people worship them as gods on this earth, if we want to open our minds to the possibility that these mythologies aren't running parallel and they're copies of each other. And I've really been looking into that deeper. And when I studied the King's List, I realized that it wasn't a copy and the Bible wasn't a copy of it. They were two separate tales. And there were different things going on at different periods of time. So I think this is very true with what you're about to break down too. And we'll sift through it, but I definitely want you to kick this off because you got some good info here.
Dude, this is why you and I can't do podcasts, because there's so much stuff that we can just go off on. Really quickly though, but what if this is just evidence of, or because we know that we have the AD and BC system, right? Before Christ, after dead, right? After Christ. What if with the crucifixion of Christ, it was to steer us into a certain timeline, right? And these evidence, because everyone know, and I'm gonna go down the list of all these artificial messiahs, what I call messiah, artificial messiahs. Again, this form of homunc-tech, and the possibility that, and this isn't to disprove Christianity in any sort of way. I'm just looking at mythology and ancient history, but how you're saying that these things were all, all these deluges of all these myths, that's what's in Genesis. Well, what if each deluge was its own deluge and it was just different stories of something similar? Because how you're saying, and maybe that proves multiverse, the alternate dimensions, whatever, and somehow, some way, people got knowledge of it and they wrote it down. Because how you're saying, absolutely, dude, I think that a lot of these gods were possessing, we know the Mesopotamians, the Sumerians, and the Egyptians were invoking deities into statues and animating them so that they would prophesize and divinate towards them. We know that. There's writings about the opening of the mouth ceremony. There's another one that the Mesopotamians called it. I forgot what else. Something similar to the Egyptians, right? So, yeah, I think that they did exist, and that plays directly into the homunculus, bringing down this elemental entity, this celestial deity into the vessel, which is a human, and having them live through that human. That's what Crowley was trying to do. They were trying to invoke the Whore of Babylon into into a person, so they would emanate and radiate. And he says it'll be born like a regular baby, except it'll have the essence of. And one of the key things that he says in that text, 367, it needs to be in a secluded area where no rational spirit or something like that wanders in the desert. Well, we know what's in the desert. The jinn live in the desert. Right? We know that, I believe it's called the desert's like the house of Satan or something I've heard it called, or the palace of Satan. The jinn can be Nephilim too. I think that's the same thing, the different name for the same thing, these entities. And he specifically says, go there so you can invoke it there, right? So I have a slideshow here with just quickly various entities, various deities throughout history that come from a miraculous birth. Now, there's a certain motif and a reoccurring theme in some of them, which I find interesting. And I want to get your interpretation of it. Well, to start off, Mesopotamian, we have Marduk, right, was created in the heart of Apsu, and, quote, he who begot him was Ea, his father. So she conceived him was Damkina, his mother. So he was, again, just born, right? We have this same thing. They were just born out of nowhere, born out of the ether or whatever, the alkahest, the prima materia, which is what these alchemists were also trying to maybe emulate. And think about this. If Jesus died for our sins, and let's say for this piece here, he was a homunculus. Well, what if that was a way to redeem humanity? Because that's part of it. And maybe that homunculus, again, just for the sake of this conversation, was created for good. The same way you can create something for good, you can create it for evil. So, these guys, which a lot of them believed, like, hey, my homunculus is good and yours is bad. Dude, there's tales of alchemists going back and forth with one another and go, no, my process makes good homunculi. Your process makes those evil ones. It's like, what? What are you saying now, dude?
Do you think that the concept of Pokemon was built on fighting homunculi?
Dude, I've gone down that rabbit hole of trying to find this occult connection with Pokemon, and I wasn't able to find one. But if you think about the elemental aspect of it, I mean, it could. We don't know what these guys are doing behind closed doors or what their intent was, but I've tried to find that connection of the Pokemon, and I haven't been able. But guess what, dude? I'll make my own, homuncumons, right? And just battle. Gotta catch them all. I got the Sumerian homunculus, got the Mesopotamian homunculi, got all these homunculi. Check out my homuncudex and just whip it out, and it's just a bunch of homunculus. Who knows, dude? But I've tried, but I haven't been able to find anything occult as far as my research has gone into Pokemon, right? Which is Yu-Gi-Oh! Definitely. There's homunculus cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! is super dark and occult. So we have Marduk, we have Teshub, which is Hittite. The god Anu was overthrown by his cupbearer Kumarbi. Anu attempted to flee, but Kumarbi bit off Anu's genitals, swallowed them, and banished him to the underworld. As a consequence of swallowing Anu's genitals, Kumarbi became impregnated with Anu's son Teshub and 4 other offspring. And then I put a little footnote here. Men have always been able to get pregnant. Take that, society. All right. I got stories going back to 2600 BCE of dudes impregnating themselves. Now, if it was for real or not, we don't ever know. But again, back again to this inversion. We have all these stories, which is sometimes the men are the ones that we'll get into, right? Greco-Roman mythology, where it was a man who birthed these entities into existence.
Absolutely. And I think that is what is trying to be emulated now, at least in society, on that concept of this stuff has been done for centuries in different formats.
Homunculizing society, alchemizing reality. Absolutely.
Really good way of putting that. Absolutely, man. And I think you're right with a lot of these names that you're bringing up. This concept has been going on for a long time. And I know you're about to touch on some Egyptian stuff now, which I think this is where you're going to get a lot of homunculi activity in Egyptian culture, because it's just endless. And you have several different virgin births, but at the same time, you don't have virgin births too, because depending on which god you're talking about, there'll be 19 different versions of it. I love it when people try to connect.
Think about that, Joel. Think about that for 1 second. 19 different versions of the same, almost as if they were trying to perfect the first one and create more clones of the same one. Like, why? In this story, he's this. In this other story, he's this. And but it's all the same God. What?
Yeah, and that's always been my pushback whenever they try to say that these other cultures had the original Yeshua and the idea of Jesus was a copy of those. Why can't they be their own things? Why does everything have to be a copy? Just back to what you said, the deluges. Why are the deluges all the same deluge? I think if we can expand our minds outside of that concept and understand that there is a supernatural world of a vast amount of entities that would connect with humanity, there's been a lot going on for a long time. And I think that, especially when you're talking about Horus, I mean, 19 different ones. So, and crazy enough, there's one story of Jesus and it remains the same. There's not like a million different stories of him. There might be stories that people come up with are not biblical, right? And say that he was over here in the United States at a certain period of time or whatever, right? I've heard them all. But the story of Yeshua stays the same. It's actually the same in the Quran. That's what's so crazy, is outside of the fact they don't think he's divine, but he was a great prophet, but he had the virgin birth. He was perfect. It was crazy. Is like Muhammad was not perfect in the text, but he is perfect. So I find that an interesting correlation between the two prophets in that particular text. But yeah, go ahead and jump into the Egyptian stuff, because I think it's super interesting. Some of these Egyptian gods that have a very homunculus type of origin.
And also, right, we're going to get into Horus here. Isis transformed herself into a kite, flew around the resurrected body of Osiris. She could conceive Horus and Osiris in this manner, although he was missing a crucial body part. Some stories mention that Isis conceived Horus on her own, although the kite conception is the most well-known version. So there's, again, various versions. An ambiguous spell in the coffin text may indicate that a flash of lightning impregnated Isis. And I want you to remember that flash of lightning. He was conceived by magic. Pharaohs, Hesepta, Amun places the Ankh to Ammos's nose, and Hatshepsut, however you say it, is conceived by Ammos. Amenhotep III, conceived by Amun, who was gone to Queen Miwiya in the form of Thutmose the Fourth. So again, we have, if you focus also on the Egyptian side of it, if we're talking about alchemy, there was also the concept of creating chimeras through the alchemical process as well. And what's in Egyptian, all their iconography is half bird, half man. Horus, half bird, half man, half whatever, half crocodile, part ape, blah blah blah. They mix up these things. So again, that's relevant to the whole homunculus and alchemical concept. And if we look at the origins of alchemy, came from the land of Chem, right? Egypt, right? So it all stems from here pretty much. And how you're saying that they found the tablets within the pyramids. Well, what if they did, right? What if Hermes for 1 second was a real entity, a real person, whatever, and passed down this knowledge to these is that why they were existing for so long? Is that why they were, they had come up with the alchemical secrets? The Emerald tablets allegedly had all the knowledge of the universe inscribed in them. So we have Judaism. Isaac, Sarah was infertile, but a miracle was vouchsafed to her. She had given birth to Isaac. The people would not believe in the miracle. No. Okay. Kind of, sort of, maybe. Maybe it happened. Or we know that older people can have, children. Emmanuel.
They were living a lot longer back then too.
They were, yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe she was in her prime. Emmanuel, this is one that interests me because it's interesting. Foreshadows the birth of the Messiah, is another name for Jesus. Therefore, the Lord of his own shall give you a sign. Behold, the young woman is with child, and she shall bear a son, and she shall call his name Emmanuel. And although this has been debated, the name translates to God with us or God is with us. We have Melchizedek, an interesting one, born from the corpse of his mother. When Nur and Noah came in to bury Sothonim, they saw the child sitting beside the corpse with, quote, his clothing on him. Born fully clothed, right? The child was fully developed physically. The child spoke with his lips and he blessed the Lord. And he was transported to another dimension and saved from the flood, right? So we have Melchizedek. I believe he's also revered in some secret societies. I'm not too up to date with that, but that's what I've seen here and there. We have Zoroaster. In Zoroastrianism, Mother Dagdova was a virgin when she conceived Zoroaster by a shaft of light. Again, back to this light motif. Zoroaster, again, another one of these main deities or prophets, I guess you could call him, of these religions. We have Greco-Roman Hellenistic, which is interesting because you talked about the connection to the Greeks and all that earlier. You mentioned something that triggered something that we've talked about before. And I believe it was Fulcanelli that talked about how all of Greek mythology was actually an encoding of alchemical knowledge. So all these stories of all these alchemists, of all these Greek gods and everything was actually alchemical knowledge encoded. And I put a picture here, Jack, if you want to pull up Aphrodite being born from, or not Aphrodite, Athena, born from Zeus's forehead from Michael Myers at Atlanta Fusions, which is one of my favorite alchemical texts. It was actually one of the first multimedia presentations in history where he did these alchemical texts with music. Okay, so he started using sound as alchemy, and you're meant to contemplate on these plates while listening to the music. So he was one of Michael Myers, Maier, his last name. So we have Greco-Roman and Hellenistic. The Greek poet Hesiod tells a story that Zeus had once lain with the goddess Metis, impregnating her, but fearing that she might bear a child mightier than himself, he swallowed her. Their daughter Athena was born fully grown from Zeus's forehead, fully armed and clad in armor. And there's also another story that relates the goddess Aphrodite was born from the foam the sea after Uranus's castrated testicles were thrown into it. So again, these gods birthing other gods, just kind of weird. I mean, sure, whatever. Dionysus, aka Bacchus, the god of winemaking, orchids and fruit, vegetation, fertility, festivity, insanity, ritual madness, religious ecstasy, and theater. Zeus appeared to his mother, Semele, in a flash of lightning, killing Semele. And so Zeus's, quote, opened his own flesh and enclosed the infant. That's kind of weird. So maybe he was the womb at that point. Again, I'm saying that men have been able to get pregnant, all right, for a long time. Further down the line than closer down the line than you might think. Dionysus was born perfect from Zeus's thigh. Okay. The jealous Titans took and this is where it gets into the homunculus aspect, because the Titans were jealous that this, demigod essentially was going to be the ruler of the universe. So they lured him away. They tore him to pieces, cooked him, and ate him so he wouldn't become the ruler of the universe. And that's interesting because in these alchemical texts, there's an alchemist, I believe it was Jabir bin Hayyan, it wasn't Jabir bin Hayyan, it was somebody else. or might have been, who knows, whatever. He came up with what I call the homunculus machine, because he came up with this thing where you spin, it's a mold of a miniature man. You put all the ingredients in there, use your imagination, blood, and all this other stuff. And then they turned it around, and it was like this, it was a whole bunch of spheres, concentric spheres. And they believe that the motion of these spheres would bring forth a soul, right? To animate this homunculus, essentially. And this is one of the guys that was arguing with other people, like, my homunculi are good, yours are bad. And then they started to take that blueprint, and then they were like, all right, so if we can make a miniature human with these ingredients, what happens when we mix bird blood in there or other? And they started creating chimeras with this homunculus machine back in the 9th or 10th century, according to some accounts.
It's really interesting, man. And to just say something real quick about Dionysus, I have seen people try to make the parallels between Dionysus and Yeshua, and it really makes me laugh a lot, because the parallels are just not even close with their stories at all. And I think it just plays into, people see somebody who's had a virgin birth in some sort of mythology, and they want to say that Yeshua's story was borrowed from that. My pushback is, why can't both stories be true? Why can't there have been these entities or these homunculus created throughout history to mimic this process that was either coming or to mimic the process after? And we know this to be true because we see this throughout all ancient texts. They were always trying to create a version of Adam. And I think that's kind of the original Golem was Adam. And then people were trying to create from that. And I always talk about fallen entities, the Watchers, being able to create. Well, they could. Not from nothing, though. And I think this is where the Yeshua story is different, because this was like the perfect conception, right? And I don't like to use the word immaculate conception, because I think some people don't know what that means exactly. Immaculate conception suggests that Mary was without sin. So I don't believe that that was true. I think that Mary's just like the rest of us. She was just chosen from this bloodline of David to host Yeshua, essentially. And she was this homunc incubator, to say it in a way that people would understand. Not that I think
that changes it completely. Immaculate, once you start to look into that, it didn't necessarily mean virgin, right? Like, it could have been something, and virgin can be without sin, right? It could also mean various things. So, but we think of it in like this sexual way of like, oh, she was a virgin, she never lived. It's like, well, maybe not. So, and that's why, again, it's up for interpretation, and they were interpreting it back in the 15th century, dude. They were talking about it.
Correct. And back to this homunculus idea of Jesus, I do like the concept of him being the original perfect version of that. Yeah. I wouldn't use the word homunculus with him, and I know that would be heretical in a lot of circles, but the idea of the process, the ultimate technology, right? I think that he was the embodiment of that ultimate technology of what Yahweh provided for us. And I think that these stories, though, that you're bringing up, Dionysus, Horus, all of these different gods throughout history, and even some men, because I know you're going to touch on one of those here in a minute, I think that they are just this degraded version of that. However good, a degraded version of that. And when we talk about gods making gods, that's an interesting concept too. How did that happen? We understand biblically and in apocryphal text how that Nephilim were created, because that makes sense to us in our minds. But how would it make sense that other gods or other entities were created? It wouldn't be in the same process how we would understand it. And maybe it does happen. And I would think that it would if the creator himself created everything. That would be the pantheon of gods underneath him, the divine council, angelic beings, all kind of other supernatural beings that we don't know about. I joke a lot about there being in other dimensions versions of tortoises or butterflies or lions in these other realms. I think there are these beings that are just beings. They're not necessarily good or bad. They could be dangerous to us if we ran up on them because of what they're constituted with. And maybe that's what happens with some of these cryptids in the wood, these metaphysical cryptids that people run into. But we don't understand that reality. We try to. And even the greatest alchemists, or even I would say some of the people that ran closest to God in the Bible, still didn't understand it. You look at Enoch, he understood it very, very well. But even he was confounded at times about what was actually going on around him. So I think that these concepts that we're exploring are not necessarily for us to understand fully or ever understand fully. But the fact that we're exploring them is getting us closer to an understanding with God. And I think that that's what God wants us to do. He wants us to ask questions of him. He wants us to ask why. You know, I all through the church as I was a kid, and not from my father, but from other pastors and other people, you can't ask God that. You can't do that. And it's like, no, he wants us to. Like, he wants us to be angry with him. You know, you look at all of the great patriarchs, man, they would get super angry with God and yell at him and ask why. We're supposed to do that because that's how we get closer to understanding and actually get closer to him. And I think that's a part of the process that we go through. I just think some of these alchemists kind of did it backwards, where they were trying to do all of this magic to get closer to God instead of just, oh, I could just talk to him. You know, let me talk to. Here's the best part.
They were the doubting Thomas, right? It's like, I have to see the holes. I have to touch the holes myself.
And here's the best part. While there were sects of the church using priests to broker us to God, the Gnostics and the alchemists were using angels to broker to God when they could have just gone to God and not have to broker between some sort of angelic being. So I find it funny that they both are kind of doing the same thing, but one from a more humanistic point of view and the other's doing it from a more supernatural point of view. It's just a weird connection that I made a while back. But yeah, get into some more of this right here. I know you're about to get into a couple of interesting human people as well, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that we all have, that's why I say I don't believe in religion, I believe in God, because I think religion has been perverted and inverted, and it's, my house has been turned into a den of thieves, right? And we know what Jesus did then. he went berserker mode, just, So we have Mithras or Mitra, the light bursting from the heavens, which were conceived as a solid vault, became in the mythology of the Magi, Mithra born from the rock. So we have Mithra again emerging from the rock. We have various depictions of that, with the Phrygian cap and all that stuff. So we have the legend of Perseus, whose mother conceived him when Jupiter came to her in the form of a shower of gold, right? The first golden shower, if you will. He was conceived from there, and then we know what he went to go on and do. Again, this very alchemical journey, Medusa, which are all part of, alchemical lore as well sometimes. We have Alexander, the Ptolemies, and the Caesars were said by some scholars to have been virgin born. It is recorded that Alexander the Great and Augustus are deemed to have been conceived of a serpent god, and they claim between them Phobos and Jupiter as their progenitors. Now, what's interesting about this is almost that they're hinting at perhaps a sort of royal bloodline, almost Merovingian in nature. We know that the Da Vinci Code made that very popular and how that plays a role into this. And also, I keep seeing this light aspect. Golden shower can also be interpreted as, again, being showered in light. And I don't know about you, dude, but I interpret that as fallen angels of sorts coming down into these people and doing what they do best, which we know that the Watchers and the Nephilim and everybody was, entering the daughters of men. Well, everyone thinks of it again in a sexual nature that we think of the, coitus in a regular way. Well, what if it was more of what I've always said, a demonic possession? There was no need for the carnal stuff. Maybe there was. Don't get me wrong. Maybe there was. But what if it was sometimes like, hey, I'm going to ping that one over there and boom. And that's it. Boom. And then you have a Nephilim hybrid coming out of there. And it's like, all right, well, I'm going to have fun with this one. And obviously, all this other stuff. But I interpreted that because it's, again, Hinduism, the story of Krishna, the deities, the agent of conception, and also the offspring. Because of his sympathy from the earth, the divine Vishnu himself descended into the womb of Devaki and was born as her son, Krishna. That's kind of where he was born, as her son. So he went through a metamorphosis. Like, how does that work? And then from the light that invested her, back into this light aspect, there are a lot of paintings of I don't know the name of it, but there's a lot of paintings of light going into Mary. I don't know if we've seen those. And some, they even have Jesus on a cross on the light. So again, they were trying to interpret, like, what was all this? Like, well, asking questions. I mean, that's just the way it is. So, but however, there is nothing in Hindu scriptures to suggest that this was a virgin birth. This is Hinduism. I have another one here. And the Ramayana, Vishnu incarnates himself as a man, Rama. So again, coming down. So the Nephilim got tired of the spiritual stuff, came down into man, created themselves as a man in the womb of Kausalya, one of the wives of the king Dasharatha. In the Mahabharata epic, Surya, the god of sun, impregnates Queen Kunti before her marriage to King Pandu, causing her to give birth to their son Karna. Surya restores her virginity afterwards, thereby allowing her to marry Pandu despite already having given birth. Also in the Mahabharata, I can't say that name, goes with his companion to the Ganga River to perform, I'm sorry, I laughed at this one, his ablutions. There he spots a beautiful Apsara named Gritachi, who has come to bathe. And then the sage is overcome by desire, causing him to involuntarily ejaculate out of excitement. So the dude just like, and then from there, they capture the semen in a vessel, and himself and then something springs forth from it. From this, again, the semen in a vessel, which is very similar to alchemy. That was one of the main ingredients they had to put in there to make sure it incubated. But we have in Hinduism this story that is far older than the alchemical text. And maybe they were interpreting it as that way. Or like, hey, if the gods could do it, back again to you wanting to usurp God and becoming God. And sometimes it was about the emulation of God, not becoming God, but becoming like him. And that was their interpretation. Like, well, you put it in the horse manure for 40 days and 40 nights. And from there, your little homunculus pet comes out, and then you're able to battle other alchemists with their homunculus. And then you guys, got to collect them all. Then there's the alchemist badges throughout all the gyms of Prague. I'm going to make a game out of this, bro. It's going to be the, Alchemon. And it's going to be about you're a young alchemist on a quest to alchemize them all and catch all the little homunculus throughout the fields here. So Buddhism, two accounts cited by Thomas David Boslooper, tells of the descent of the future of the Bodhisattva from the Tutsita body into the mother's womb, the appearance of the Buddha in the mother as a shining gem, and the accompanying wonders in the natural world. The most popular legendary account of the birth of Buddha. In this account, the great being chose the time and place of his birth, the tribe into which he would be born, and who his mother would be, Maya. His mother fell asleep and dreamed that the 4 archangels carried her to the Himalayan mountains, where their queens bathed and dressed her. In her dream, the great being soon entered her womb from her side in the form of a white elephant. Very interesting there. We're going to get into some Chinese mythology. The Yellow Emperor is sometimes said to have been the fruit of extraordinary birth, as his mother Fu Bao conceived him as she was aroused while walking in the country by a lightning bolt from the Big Dipper. Lightning bolt, again, flash of light. Qi, the abandoned one, who later became known as Haoji, a cultural hero or god of agriculture, was held in some accounts to have been miraculously conceived when his mother, the consort of Jing Yuan, stepped into a footprint left by the supreme god Shangdi. I wonder if he was a Yeti or not. Maybe he bore some Yeti babies. Some Taoist schools held that Laozi was conceived when his mother gazed upon a falling star. In this leitmotif for some reason. He was born while his mother was leaning against a plum tree. Laozi was said to have emerged as an old man with a full gray beard. This may be because his name, Old Master, could be read as old child. Fully born, clothes, gray hair, everything. That's crazy. And then Christianity. We have John the Baptist, born from Zechariah and Elizabeth, were both very old and had been unable to have a child. But again, how you said, maybe they lived longer. She was in his prime. An angel appeared to Zechariah and told him that Elizabeth would bear a son named John. Zechariah doubted the angel's words and was struck mute until his child's birth. Despite her advanced age, Elizabeth became pregnant and gave birth to John, and Zechariah's speech was restored there. Can you imagine? It's like, STFU. And then it's like, you don't talk for 9. It's like, you shouldn't doubt. The angels, bro. The angels were trolling them, dude. And then we have early accounts, again, apocryphal texts that talk about Mary's birth with her parents as Saint Anne and Saint Joachim. According to the tradition of the Catholic Church, they were childless when an angel came to them and told them that they would give birth to a daughter. During the conception of Mary, she was preserved from stain of original sin. So again, back again to this idea. Again, this is apocryphal. It's not canon. And then Jesus, the one that we all know and love. Shout out to Jesus. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior who is the Messiah, the Lord. And we know what happens after that, right? We have this Messiah figure born into a royal bloodline. Right, the bloodline of David and everybody else from there, and then the rest is history. And there's other ones. There's Quetzalcoatl and various other. I mean, there's just a bunch of people throughout history that have been fashioned in a similar way. Sometimes virgin, sometimes not, but definitely some divine intervention. Bolts of lightning, which I interpreted as the fallen ones, Nephilim and nature, meddling with the affairs of man just to be trolls. They have this troll aspect, this clown aspect. And it's interesting because they introduce women the art of makeup. And then you have the whole Nephilim and clown connection there from that, as some people have developed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you brought up the bloodline of David. People don't know this, but Mary was of the bloodline of David, but so was Joseph. And they both were from the bloodline of David. And it was known in Hebrew culture that you would generally try to find a wife from the same tribe. Now, understandably, in those days, your tribe's massive, right? So you're not even close to being, first cousins or anything like that. So it's a little different. It operated a little different then. But they were both from the bloodline of David.
Story real quick. I have a cousin who she met this guy, right, in Puerto Rico, and they had kids, and the kids, they had some issues. It turns out that there were like 5th or 6th cousins, like separated. They got married and everything, bro. And they learned this after the fact. They didn't even have any idea that they were related. So it happens, dude. I mean, I know firsthand it happens.
Yeah, that's a wild story. And this whole episode's been wild, but I'm really glad that you came on to talk about this idea. And I'm glad you pointed out the connection between the bolts of light or falling stars. Generally speaking, anytime one of these messiahs or great people were created, you see this happening in some sort of either iconography or part of the stories about these particular people. Outside of Jesus, there was no bolt of lightning there. Obviously Joseph was told by an angel that Mary was going to have a virgin birth and him not to sweat it out. So I think that was the only part of that was actually told. So I think that part of the story is a little different. And I do want to read one thing before we wrap it up, I thought this was interesting, and I was reading some stuff on Paracelsus, and he's done a lot in his past on understanding what the homunculus was, how it's created, but he did make one particular point that I thought stuck out to me. And he said, God's will to make man out of two and not out of one alone. For if men were born of the seed of one individual, he would not change in nature. His child would be just as he is, in the manner of a walnut tree, which is reborn of itself alone, and therefore is entirely like the one from which it is born. But the mixing of seeds of man and woman results in so much change that no individual can be like the other. Each individual seed breaks the unity of the other, and that is why no man is like another. So Paracelsus himself was saying that to make a homunculus is against God's will, because it's God's will for a man and a woman to create from the seed of man and the egg of a woman, to create a human being who is like no other. And I think that's the individuality that God gave us the ability to create life from. And even though Paracelsus himself studied all aspects of it, at the end of the day, even he said, oh, it's not God's will for this to be done. And this is the originator of the concept, at least in modern alchemical terms.
16th century, yeah.
Right. But yeah, man, I am really happy you came on here to do this. You know, I know it's a touchy subject for some people, at least the jolting idea of Yeshua being a homunculus, which at the end of the day, I don't think he was a homunculus, but I do think that this, as you said, this tech that the creator knows, the blueprint, as I like to use, he had the perfect blueprint. All of these other homunculus throughout history were just a copy of that, or trying to be a copy of that, in my opinion. That's where I land on the idea of this. But I know that alchemists would say Jesus is an homunculus in their understanding of how it worked. And I think in that way, that's how we have to think about it. But, you know, just the idea that life could be created without something else entirely is just a fascinating concept.
In the 21st century, that's 100%
right
real.
Now. Absolutely. Yeah. We know that it's happening. We know that there are several labs that are creating embryos without a male or a female, for that matter. We know IVF exists, where they're basically taking sperm and egg and putting it in a petri dish and mixing up with whatever else. These things exist. The homunculus idea is not far-fetched in any stretch of the imagination. But when you add the divine aspect to it, I think that's where it gets interesting, because how does that blueprint work? We're just trying to mimic it. And I think that's a lot of what we've seen. And I think these angelic beings, fallen, were no different. And I think they're just trying to mimic that process too.
Yeah, and one last thing, we have to remember that we're dealing with, right, this homunc tech or alchemy. It's a divine form of technology. It's a, maybe not divine, but supernatural form of technology that works on multiple different layers of reality all at once. So there's a reason why alchemists were a secret society. There's a reason why only the initiated could create the magnum opus, and there was only a handful of guys that achieved it. And the guys that did conveniently create the magnum opus, well, they weren't around to tell the people what they exactly did to achieve that magnum opus. So it's like, hey, we just heard this guy disappeared. Then we saw him another 300 years later somewhere else. So, and number one form of source, trust me, bro.
Very true, man. Hey, before we get out of here, remind everybody where to find you again. TJOJP.com, One-on-One podcast, live on Twitch every Tuesday night, on the One-on-One Media YouTube channel, or on twitch.tv/One-on-One podcast. And on my website, you can find the Occultist Mondays, comic books, Homunculus Owner's Manual,
all that good stuff, dude. And I appreciate you having me on to talk about this. I don't talk about this unless people ask, because it is a touchy subject, and I'm sure people are going to be going nuclear in the comment section regardless, but it is what it is. And we're looking at this again, this the history. We're just browsing history.
Browsing history, man. Appreciate it, Juan.
Appreciate you.
All right, guys, I'm going to do like I do every week, and we're going to read some 5-star reviews because I really appreciate what you guys have been doing by running up the 5-star reviews on all platforms. It's really helping the show get out in the algorithm, and I really appreciate you for that. We're going to start with Apple Podcast. Magic Red Bengal. Grab the rabbit, take a dive. I really appreciate Joel's commitment to research. He doesn't just speak from emotion and opinion, and he's certainly not media programmed. He'll also let you know if new information is surfaced that may impact something he's previously talked about. The honesty and transparency is refreshing. As for future shows, I'm hoping Joel will talk about some of his music, maybe do a storytellers or behind the music style episode or segment. Appreciate that, Magic Red Bengal. I'm sure in the future I will do some music segments, and I may talk about some of my interactions in the music world as well as a part of that. Got Denny Horn. You watching? Love the podcast. Your maturity shows through every episode. That being said, you've been watching Jen's new show. For anyone that doesn't know about Jen's new show or who Jen is, if you know, you know. That's all I'm going to say. We've got Trail Finders Rabbit Traps. Strong work, brother. Please keep it coming. Appreciate that, Trail Finders. That's what I hope to keep doing here. So now we're going to kick it to Spotify. We've got Ingrid Dawn. Yes, love the Free the Rabbit song. Eat. Appreciate that, Ingrid Dawn. Glad you like the song. And for anybody that doesn't know, the intro song is out on all platforms. Anywhere you listen to music, you can go check it out now. We've got Van. Love your discussions on the Bible. You dig deep and give your audience a lot of food for thought. Appreciate that, Van. We've got Mark Thomas. Theory and hypothesis are very different in definition. Evolution is not a theory, as in the way you think a theory works. I appreciate that, Mark. You know, I encourage people to think for themselves and to believe what they want to believe. In saying that, evolution is a belief system. However much they want to tell you that it is a scientific fact, it is not as considered a theory. As a matter of fact, I got 2 definitions today about hypothesis and theory. And I just want to give a little bit of context to what you just said. A hypothesis is a proposed explanation or prediction that can be tested through research, essentially an educated guess based on observations. So hypothesis would not be evolution in the sense of if you believe in evolution, it's not a hypothesis. Hypothesis is actually the lesser of the two. While a theory is a well-established explanation supported by a large body of evidence, considered to be the best explanation for a phenomenon based on repeated testing and scientific consensus. That's why I say that evolution is a theory and why it is purported as a theory in school. Because they claim that it is supported by a large body of evidence. And it is the best explanation for a phenomenon based on this large body of evidence. Now, in saying that, I don't think that there's not evidence for evolution, at least on a small scale, right? I don't believe in species changing into separate species. I do believe in adaptive evolution. I've said that plenty of times on the show. But yes, evolution would be considered a theory per the definition. Hypothesis is actually the lesser form of that. I would consider creationism a theory because there is a large body of evidence, but still I cannot prove to you what happened tons and tons and tons and tons and years ago, whether you think it's 10,000 or whether you think it's billions. I cannot prove it to you, just like someone cannot prove to me evolution. I think we need to get to the point of understanding that we have a belief system. This is what I believe. It's not a provable fact. It's what you believe. And I'm perfectly fine with that. But we need to stop throwing around terms that these are things that are absolute fact. And everybody does it in conspiratorial world too. And that's why I started the show, because I got exhausted with people telling other people how to believe, how to think. And I think this is one of those times. And I think you have a belief system in evolution, and you believe the theory of evolution, which I'm perfectly fine with. Everybody is allowed to believe that, but I don't think we should be angry at each other for thinking differently or start throwing out terms without having a at least general basis of what those terms are. But I appreciate you sending that. I always encourage people to send out what they think about things because it helps me as I'm looking deeper into things as well. We're going to go to YouTube. We've got Blicky Gober. Is it possible that a supernatural, omnipotent God could have created a fully mature Earth 10,000 years ago? I think so. I perfectly believe that too. As a matter of fact, in my Old Earth episode, I did not say that the 10,000 years ago or 6,000 years ago time frame didn't occur. I'm just talking about from Adam down. Yes, I believe that that is the space of time. And I believe he created a fully mature Earth. What I'm saying is that Earth got destroyed, possibly multiple times before we got to Adam. You know, I think when people see these old Earth, they get an idea of what it is without truly listening to what I'm actually saying. And again, it's just a theory. I could be wrong with it. I'm open to being wrong. But to me, it's the veracity that people hold on to their theories and beliefs and attack others because of that. And that's why I did the show again, is to not have that. We can have general discussions, but this like pinpointed, this is it attitude, that's not what I'm here for. We've got Fat Boy Gaming. This show is always talking about great subjects. Keep it up. Appreciate that, Fat Boy Gaming. We've got John Sergei 9043. Sounds like another epic dive Joel took for us, leaving no stone in its settled resting place. Can't wait. I did the best I could, and I think that the more research I do, the more things will change. Again, these are just theories backed with tons of research, but these are just theories, just like other people's ideas or theories as well. I think we've got to get out of this mind frame of like, we've got it figured out. It's really bad in the quote unquote critically thinking sphere, which I think most people that are in that sphere are not critical thinkers at all. And I think they just follow along with whatever they heard someone else say and they like it. And sadly, that is probably how it's always going to be. But I do appreciate you guys. You guys are great. And even the comments that are rebuttals to how I think on the show, perfectly encourage it. I think that we are supposed to question anything that we hear, including myself. But that being said, we're going to play a song called Gray on the way out. This song meant a lot to me when I wrote it. It's very personal. I hope it's personal to you as well. And you know what it is, guys. Go outside, touch grass, and get your tail out the hole.
I'm trying to be me, but every time I do, they point their fingers at me. Sometimes I wanna scream. I can't fit within their kaleidoscope of what they want me to believe. But I can't fade to black. But I can't fade to black. It's all in the gray. Scales can't balance the way. Colors bleed out the frame. Black and white on the side. It's all in the gray. Scales can't balance the way. Colors bleed out the frame. Black and white on the side. I don't know if I lie to myself every time I say my family's on my mind. That don't mean I don't care. It just sometimes I feel stretched thin, and I know that isn't fair, but I can't fade to black, but I can't fade to black. It's all in the grind, skills can't balance the way, colors bleed out the frame, black and white on the side. It's all in the grind, skills can't balance the way, colors bleed out the frame, black and white on the side. It's all in the grind, it's all in the grind. It's all in the grind. I'm trying to be me, but every time I do, they point their fingers at me.